Good morning, everyone. My name's Greg Lavery. Welcome to the fourth module in this webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about what does net zero carbon campus look like. So in module 3 we looked at what a workspace looks like, and now we're going to be talking about what a campus looks like. And this is not looks like in entirely the aesthetic sense. We'd like to sort of explore a little bit how a campus might work in a net zero carbon world. What we're going to postulate, so the way we're going to frame this is a 15-minute presentation by myself, followed by a discussion. Obviously, it's all what we're putting up in the presentation is an hypothesis, or hopefully a very logically argued position on how we think campuses might evolve. And of course, it's up for discussion, and we look forward to a lively 15-minute chat afterwards, after the presentation. So if I might push on then, if you recall that at the start of this series, we talked about what where are the carbon emissions in buildings. We talked about how to get to net zero carbon cost effectively, and the stepping off point for that was where are the carbon emissions in buildings. So this is a commercial building, or let's call it a non-domestic building that can be used for all sorts of different purposes, including government or university or whatever. And what we found when we looked at this was that there's an enormous amount of embodied emissions embodied within the fit out, which in itself, the fit out's 43%, the embodied emissions are 70% of a building. Therefore, solving the embodied emissions, which is the emissions that are embodied within stuff, is actually the biggest equation that we need to deal with when we're thinking about driving to net zero. We also talked about how the linear economy is failing us there, and that's creating those embodied emissions. However, the circular economy is a wonderful solution that enables us to reduce carbon emissions as well as save money, save resources, and save waste. Therefore, if we think about driving a campus to net zero, then that's going to involve a lot of the circular economy. And by the way, campus, I'm not just talking about a university campus. It could be a hospital campus. It could also be a corporate that has lots of offices around, or it even could be a bank that has lots of branches around. So we're talking sort of multi-premise estates that require management. And of course, we're trying to reduce the emissions in all of those. So if we think then, well, what is this stuff, and where are those embodied emissions? There are a whole lot of different elements to that, including potentially doors, furniture, walls, flooring, equipment, including AV and IT, as well as very specific equipment. If you're a hospital, you've got MRI machines, you've got second life flooring, kitchens, etc., all of which can be remanufactured or at least brought back to a brand new condition and then reused very effectively to create an 80% reduction in emissions and some cost savings, and ideally some social benefits as well. So if we think here quite laterally around all of the stuff within buildings, then the equation looks something like, okay, can we take items from building A, put them into buildings B and C until the end of the life of those spaces, then transfer them to building D and building E, and keep going around in a circle where those materials are used over and over again in a very effective way, each time being brought back to as new condition with minimal deterioration. Otherwise, you've got a series of sort of second-hand problems, and we all know the problems with swapping waste is essentially it degrades every step and therefore is a one-way trip. That's why we think remanufacturing is so powerful. When doing this movement of items around a campus, there are a few things to consider, and obviously we've all thought about these. Anyone who manages multiple buildings is, well, look, Greg, all that movement around sounds great, but actually there's some really practical considerations that we want to build into it. One is, let's minimize transport, because obviously transport creates emissions, it creates cost. And similarly, storage. I mean, we know most universities have a storage area which is overflowing with furniture that no architect has dared to even use, unfortunately, but that creates a storage cost because that space could be used for other things. And of course, if you're stripping out a building, you have to put stuff somewhere between spaces. Also, there's the sustainability issue of local employment. Wouldn't it be great if we could do all of that movement around with local employment, and can we create jobs for those who are furthest from the workforce? And I'm talking here about long-term unemployed people with disabilities who live within a bus ride of that campus. And all of those considerations pull together into that sort of triple bottom line outcome, where what we want to achieve is economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability, which I think is on everyone's agenda. How do you pull all that together? Well, to think about these, there's a number of then implications. If we want to achieve all of this, how do we do that? There's a number of implications that, as you think through this, logically come up. So, well, first of all, if you're going to be able to remanufacture, reuse, and redeploy, it requires the purchase of that in the first place to be very well considered. So it needs to be a consistent match set of products, obviously, because if we're going to mix and match them in future lives, they need to be at least visually consistent. They also need to be able to be remanufactured. And a key problem here we know within universities and hospitals, for example, is random decentralized purchasing by individual departments to say, hey, we've got 10 grand left in our furniture budget, but use it or lose it. So, hey, let's buy another 10 workspaces or workstations, or a lounge setting that doesn't match with anything, that's pulled out of a super cheap Chinese catalog that can't be remanufactured. So there is a logical implication of this circular approach that you can't let that happen, right? It needs to be all centralized and drawn from a consistent and choice edited catalogue, if you like. That's also very helpful in ensuring that ergonomic standards are met, so there should really be no problem in doing that. It's just, I suppose, addressing those bad habits that exist in the decentralized purchasing side of things. A second implication is around waste. So waste management is actually part of the cycle. So actually thinking about how do we take that waste and use that within new buildings. And what we see a lot of, unfortunately, is that waste management is treated entirely separately from furniture and furnishings provision. And so you've got at one hand a whole bunch of waste people out there throwing stuff very roughly into skips and taking it off to landfill, when actually that could be remanufactured and put in at the front end into new spaces as remanufactured furniture. And unfortunately, very rarely have we been asked to bid on a project for furniture, and that's right, specialty obviously, where someone said, oh, and by the way, you get to address what happens on the waste. That just never happens. That's a whole separate framework, and we're not even going to talk about that, which is a real shame. So let's call that joined up thinking. The third point is that it makes a lot of sense to refurbish on site. That way you can employ local disadvantaged staff, minimise transport, and minimise storage costs. And in a way here, it's a back to the future scenario, because most of us will recall, or most of us who are a little older, will recall that a while ago, back sort of at the end of the 20th century, sorry, in the late 1900s, there were a lot of on-site workshops within universities, within campuses, that employed people to actually fix furniture, believe it or not. So this is not a brand new idea, this idea of, hey, let's create something on site. Now, obviously, you want to bring that up to the modern age with digital manuals, video instructions, 3D printing of parts as needed. All of that is quite doable, even in a distributed sense on every single campus. A fourth implication is that information is really important. So it's important to know what materials, equipment, furniture, furnishings you have, its condition, and where it is. Those are the three absolute basics. On top of that, wouldn't also be great to know when the warranty runs out, who the original supplier was, what the service agreements look like, what work's been done to it, etc., etc. That information is absolutely vital, because if you're thinking about using these items in a new space, you have to know that. And then, of course, the other part of information is how to maintain, repair and refurbish it. So, for instance, digital cutting patterns for fabrics in order to be able to reupholster things, that's pretty much a prerequisite, and those exist, but not very many of them around. And certainly manufacturers won't let you have those, but there are companies out there who are creating those, including ourselves. The other important two factors here at the bottom are the planning and design side of things. So on planning, we talk about multi-year estate planning. Now, most campuses will have a plan that says over the next year we're going to transform this space from X to Y, be in the case of a university, perhaps a disused lecture theatre is going to be turned into 2 seminar rooms, or a cafeteria is going to be converted into a staff common room, something like that. That planning is very well done in advance, but that's also needed when you think about redeploying materials and furnishings, because if you know what needs to go where when, it solves the storage problem. So we talk a lot about virtual storage. So the best storage you can have is when someone's actually using something. That means, and what you need to know is when they're going to stop using that, so that you can program in where that's going to go and who's going to use that in the future, and obviously allow some time for the refurbishment or remanufacturing of that in between. So that multi-year planning needs to feed into the thinking about the circular economy reuse of things within a campus. And then we think the final piece of the puzzle is designers. So right now, despite the Architects Declare movement, which has led to over 1,200 architects signing up to say, we will absolutely hand on heart do things that are low carbon for the rest of our lives, actually there's not much evidence that that's been effective at all, and it's almost a sort of an embarrassment to the profession, because architects and designers, there are some very good ones that are making good moves in the right direction. However, there are a number of laggards within the architectural profession who really haven't changed anything about how they practice, certainly not counting carbon or setting carbon budgets, which is an absolute basic prerequisite. And so what you need is a designer that's very happy to walk into a shed full of furniture and say, hey, yes, we can remanufacture that by changing the color of the base through powder coating. We can put new tops on that. We can reupholster those worn chairs over there and create an attractive aesthetic, because for remanufacturing to be successful, the aesthetic cannot be compromised. I think we all realise how important that is. We don't want any of our users looking at something that's been created in a space or a building and saying, sorry, this is second best. It looks a bit shabby, because that's never good enough. So creating beautiful aesthetics using very good materials that can be remanufactured has to be the key theme here. So those are we see as the sort of, what have we got there, 2, 4, 6 implications of all that thinking about how to drive carbon emissions down. So how does that translate then onto campus, where we started with that very simplistic diagram showing flow of materials? Well, actually, when you put that logic in place, actually what it looks like probably is this workshop where all the materials flow through that workshop to make sure they're back to pristine condition. And whilst we're talking about aesthetic, I mean, we did in the title talk about what does a low carbon campus look like. Worth noting as well that buildings will have solar PV on the roof, as well as solar hot waters systems. They'll have district heating and ground source heat pumps, and they'll have energy efficient equipment throughout. So let's take that as a no-brainer that's absolutely going to be done. However, that's not really going to affect the aesthetic of an institution, because the solar panels go on the roof, the heat source pumps are out of sight anyway. So so here is a theoretical diagram of how it could work. Let's have a look at a case study where this has actually been done. And this is Transport for Wales. They started in 2 premises within Cardiff, so St Mary's House and Southgate House, with some nice photos of those there, where they had chosen their furniture fairly effectively. I mean, more at Southgate House, when TFW started up just a few years ago, their initial furniture was very well chosen, very ideal for remanufacturing, and they did that essentially by choosing a good brand and some good models within that. St Mary's House, not so much. That was sort of probably legacy sort of 80s, 90s furniture from one of their let's call it a subdivision, their rail business. But what we did, and this was a right project, we were able to create a workshop on site for 4 months within the new Cleese-Cadwin Pontypridd headquarters building, which is shown there. And in that workshop, we were able to employ 4 long-term unemployed people with disabilities. We worked with the Merthyr Tydfil Institute for the Blind, who are just up the road from Pontypridd. They provided that labour and looked after them and trained them and made sure they had all their needs met. But beyond that, actually, Merthyr Tydfil also have a very good woodworking workshop. They were able to cut down tops, create new tops, and create some really good pieces, including some of the items of furniture you can see in that bottom photo there. That then enabled us to work with local small medium enterprises, local trades, and social enterprises, including MTIB and a couple others as well. So that whole idea of how can you create that social impact as well as environmental impact and cost savings, that was embodied in that project. And subsequent to that, some of that furniture at Cleese-Cadwin has gone on to the Wrexham office because it was surplus to needs as they repurposed some of the areas within the building after a year or so. That then led to a demand for that furniture to be reused within Wrexham, and that was taken out. A minimum remanufacturing was needed because it was done quite recently. It was all in very good condition. That was moved to Wrexham at minimal cost and very small footprint as well. So here's an example of that. When I started with that very initial idealistic stick diagram actually coming into play. I might add that there is an event going on through the C Net Zero network. If you don't know about that, would love to keep you informed about that. We've got a newsletter I think going out tomorrow that'll mention this visit. We've actually arranged a site visit through the C Net Zero network to Transport for Wales Cleese Cadman building, that one there in the middle of the photo, for everyone to see all of the great things that were done around sustainability in the space. We're hoping it'll bring together all of those working in the built environment towards a better future, those concerned about sustainability, especially planners, government agencies and others. We'll bring them together on the 21st of February. It's in the evening from 5:30 to 7:30. A little bit out of town for those who are based in England, but certainly great to have all the Welsh participants in the circular economy and the built environment attend that on the 21st of February. Plus you get to have a sticky beak through their new office. There is a photo there and there's a case study on our website, spoiler alert. So that's how it can actually work in practice. So if we draw all this together into some pretty quick conclusions, in our view, net zero campuses actually won't look much different to conventional campuses the way they've traditionally been made, other than a lot more visual consistency across furnishings and equipment, which actually is not a bad thing. So if you've got a building estate around the UK or even around the world, of course you want your staff to be walking into spaces as they move between offices that are visually consistent, and they know how to use those spaces, and the branding follows across. So actually we don't think visual consistency is a bad thing. Actually we think it's a good thing, but making sure that everything you buy is visually consistent to make sure that they can all be remanufactured and reused together in different configurations is really important. However, whilst they might not look very different, they will operate very differently in our view to drive this circular economy. And in doing so, the good news is they should create cost savings, community benefits, and environmental advantages. So that's our view. Would love to hear your thoughts in the discussion. But before we do that, just a quick advertisement here to say, look, this was session number 4. Session number 5 will occur on the 20th of February. We'd love to have you there, where we'll be talking about the 5 metrics that we think are really logical when designing a net zero carbon office. There might be some surprises there, but within 5 metrics, we think we can stretch across the triple bottom line of economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. And then we've got another one on the 6th of March, how to calculate the carbon emissions of an office fit out, and then more interesting ones coming up yet to be scheduled in terms of dates, but we estimate these will be happening roughly once a month. So you can register for those further webinars. You can also catch the recordings where you, as they say, catch up with your viewing of these modules if you'd like. On that same ripeoffice.com/academy, where we've captured the presentations we've done from the previous 3 for posterity, and in case anyone wants to catch up on the topic.